Okay, so this is part two. Sorry, my video got cut off on there. So what I want to talk about is filling in on this idea of metacognition being the process of thinking about thinking. And so metacognition is different than cognition because cognition is like the acquisition and application of knowledge through complex mental processes. It's essentially what we do when we demonstrate an understanding of the question, exhibit a control over language, grammar, and mechanics, and awareness of how the performance came to be, awareness of genre, something along those lines. But metacognition is the ability to perceive the very steps by which success occurs, and then you can articulate the various qualities and components that contribute to the production of effective writing. So for instance, this happens through revision when you understand the structure of a draft, you understand patterns of error and how to correct those. You can start discriminating between what is necessary, what can be discarded, and what can be more effectively displayed to understand the purpose of the assignment. So cognition is kind of these processes that happen, but metacognition takes the step back and tries to understand how these processes happen and why in which we're making these decisions that we're making. So very broadly, the goal of metacognition is to understand the processes we take as writers to either reproduce the success you have on a writing assignment or a piece of writing, or understand why that success was not achieved. For instance, if you feel really good about a paper that you turn in for a class and you don't do well on it, you're going to have to kind of engage in some metacognition and some reflection in order to understand the decisions that you made that didn't turn out to be very effective in that writing process. So it's taking a step back and be like, okay, what did I do here that was effective? What did I do that wasn't? And how can I work to, either reproduce this or, fix it before it gets any worse? So why does it matter for a writing class? Because there's this difference between cognition and metacognition. So writers engage in cognition when they reflect on what they're doing in that particular moment. So the conscious processes that we're kind of using in that moment, when we write, when we use a verb instead of a noun, sort of those things that happen almost automatically. But we display metacognition as writers when we consider why they made the choices, the rhetorical choices they did. So for instance, why did we say this here? Why did we appeal to this value? Does it have to do with audience? How did we work that in? Very, very important. So the need for metacognition assumes special importance when writer finds themselves required to work in unfamiliar contexts or with forms with which they are unfamiliar. In those cases, metacognition allows for writers to access which skills and knowledge sets apply in these novel situations and which do not. So essentially, this relates to genre conventions and expectations. So what I mean here is that when you find yourselves in unfamiliar contexts, you can use this process of metacognition to understand maybe what's expected from this certain situation. And that's directly related to genre, and we can use genre and the skill of genre as an example for this. For instance, you might gain the skill of genre in this class of understanding different genres so that when you get into a new context, you can kind of take a second and reflect and be like, okay, I know that that genre is a thing. How can I maybe apply genre to this assignment to get more effectively at the purpose, or something along those lines? So when you find yourselves in unfamiliar contexts, you can kind of take a step back and say, okay, what do I need to watch my thinking process on how I'm getting to the end product, because this situation is requiring me not just to have an automatic response to this. So metacognition is important because when it doesn't happen, we resort to these entrenched kind of beliefs and practices in writing. So for instance, if we've been taught to write 5 paragraphs in all situations, we might resort to this habituated practice in rhetorical situations that call for different genres. And we've talked a lot about how important it is to understand how genres carry these conventions and expectations with them. And so that's a great moment to use that skill of genre during a metacognitive process and be like, okay, what's expected for this genre? How can I reflect, and how can that inform what decisions I'm going to make as a writer to nail the conventions of this genre? So how do we get to metacognition? So we get there through reflection. They're intertwined, they're exactly related. You have to get to metacognition processes, you have to be able to reflect. So here we're going to think about reflection as a mode of inquiry, a deliberate way of systematically recalling writing experiences to reframe the current writing situation. That should be doing, sorry. And this allows us to recognize what we are doing in the particular moment and why we are considering the rhetorical choices that we're making or made. So when we reflect on a piece of writing, we could be like, oh, what was I thinking in this situation? What were the expectations of the assignment? How well did I do at hitting those expectations? Do I have to reflect on other practices that I use? Like, why did I not do this so well in this section here? Like, what was I thinking this is a 5-paragraph essay? Did I not understand the audience or the genre? Yes. So those are some things to consider here. This helps you transfer the knowledge and practice from one writing situation to another. So for instance, you might learn genre in this class and repurpose it in another situation, but you want to be able to use this idea to inform the rhetorical choices you're making in those new rhetorical situations that you find yourself. So thinking about this idea of why are we learning about metacognition, it's really important because it starts to get us in the process of using reflection to our advantage. So I like to think about metacognition and reflection as a really helpful tool for our writing processes, especially during revision. So we can kind of see this happening in both sections of this assignment. The letter where we're thinking about, what we learned, we're reflecting, we're thinking about how we grew as learners. And then in this revision portion as well, where we're going to go back and systematically think about what choices we made in that moment that yielded this outcome. So something really important is that this is a tool. Metacognition and reflection is a tool to use when you encounter these new situations where you're really going to have to think through these processes. And we're giving it a name for it because we want you to, learn and engage with this material outside of this class. So for instance, in a situation or an unfamiliar writing context, you can reflect on past prior knowledge and previous experiences to then inform that current writing situation in which you might have to make different decisions that you would have normally made in the previous one, or you might have to adapt. But you can use this idea to say, hey, I know that audience is important, like who's my audience here? Or I know genre is important, what's the genre here? What's the conventions of this? How do I write with that new writing situation? So these are all important things to take into consideration, and metacognition and reflection are super cool and can be used outside of this class and your future writing contexts.